All right, well, that'll leads us straight into question and answer now. Anyone feel free to jump in.
Yes.
What would you like to be remembered for after your term? My question was asking the Minister, what would you like to be remembered for as Minister for Veterans Affairs? What challenges and difficult forward would you like to achieve?
That's an excellent question. I think, as I said, the Invictus Games will probably be the highlight of my time as the Minister for Veterans Affairs, and I would like to be remembered as providing a fantastic Invictus Games. It's going to be hard to beat Orlando, but we're going to work very, very carefully to it, because I mean they had Bruce Springsteen and all these American people. We'll have to find a few pub bands to come that afternoon, and so I want to make sure that it's seen as a successful and inclusive Invictus Games that is well patronised by the entire community. I'd like to be remembered as somebody who employed 1,000 returned servicemen and women in the New South Wales government on their return. I think that would be a figure that hasn't been seen since probably the end of the Second World War. We've also got a policy of providing support for homeless veterans. So this is something that the Commonwealth has normally had to do, but the state government has set aside $1 million to prioritise homeless veterans and their families. So I'd like to be remembered as somebody who worked. I'm not going to do a Bob Hawke and say no veteran will be homeless in 2019, but I'd like to think that there's no reason for a veteran to be homeless in 2019. And of course, the Marquee project, even though I've just been talking about welfare and how, it shouldn't all be about war memorials, but this war memorial down at Hyde Park is going to be fantastic. It was originally designed as a water feature, but because the public subscriptions dried up during the Great Depression, so it was actually never finished, that war memorial in Hyde Park. You probably walked past it 100 times. It was actually never finished 80 years ago because subscriptions lined up. Now, in my electorate, as Phil Bridie will tell you, I get very frustrated about public work delays. So it's an 80-year public work delay, so I've got to make sure that I don't complain too much about that. So that's going to have the water feature that we're supposed to have, plus we're putting in a library, a lecture theatre. It's going to be a place of not only commemoration but education. It's going to have a wall which it'll feature the names of the 1,699 towns, hamlets, suburbs, cities and villages where soldiers actually enlisted to go to the war, and next to it's going to have soil from that place. So I've been going around the state collecting soil from those places. I'm not going to all 1,699. I am trying to get to the Lord Howe Islander ceremony, but the Premier won't let me. We are going to have that as a list, so listing, honouring every part of the state where sacrifice was made. And we decided on using soil for three reasons. For the ancient Australians, the Aboriginals, they belonged to the land, so soil was something that they belonged to. For the colonial Australians, the soil was where they toiled to establish their crops and they mined it. And for the soldier, of course, soil is sacred because it's where the blood is spilled. So we're collecting soil for those reasons, and that's going to be in the war memorial. So there's a lot for me to look back on. I think there'll be a lot for me to look back on at the end of this parliamentary term, and so that we had a lot to do. We did a lot in a portfolio that's only new at a state level, because this is not something the state government's traditionally got involved in. But to Mike Baird's credit, and to Gladys Berejiklian's credit, they decided that we would have a veterans minister. It would be somebody who's come from the military, and we would provide all of this support to the community. And a few good parties. So one other thing we're doing tomorrow night is, this is with Mike Baird's brainchild. We have very lovely afternoons for Vietnam veterans and Korean War veterans at Government House, fading as they are every year. But he decided and we invite about 100 of them randomly from around the state, and they come and they're presented to the Governor, and the Premier will say a few words, and it's very pleasant. It's a nice part of my job. Mike, however, and Gladys tomorrow night will do the same thing. He decided we're also going to have one for contemporary veterans. But it's not going to be a cup of tea at Government House. So they go to a big venue, invite 1,000 returned servicemen and women, put the champagne's flowing, they get a band in, and it's a party. So that's probably another upside of the job. The irony is, though, for Mike, the first year he was Premier, and Gladys is going to see it tomorrow night, you can imagine going to a Korean War veteran function and then a Vietnam veterans function. Some very old, distinguished gentlemen with medals on and having a cup of tea and the odd sherry, and it's all very pleasant. And then tomorrow night, Gladys will see, as Mike did, and his eyes nearly popped out, these 23-year-old girls with long legs and high heels and about 4 rows of medals, and who just want to grab the Premier and dance on the dance floor with them. So it's quite. It just is a good reflection of how not only how the high tempo of the Australian Army, and Navy and Air Force, but also on the type of people that are coming through it at the moment.
Mr. Portier's side to create the modern forces in the UK. He used to say, having heard a great deal about Army, that the key to superiority was air power.
Of course. That's why the Army have helicopters.
We could keep going with this, but probably best not to. You touched earlier about, obviously, about fundraising for the RSL side, and I guess if you link back to many years in your public relations role, then it was probably a lot more about sort of face-to-face public relations, press, and so on. Whereas obviously now with web-enabled, the speed at which things happen. I guess with fundraising in the modern day, for that a lot of it's about presence in the streets. So particularly, the ADF going out there either on Anzac or Remembrance, selling poppies and a range of other things. So it's about presence and visibility. So if you take that fundraising element away from the RSLs, will that have an impact, do you think, in terms of bringing new people into the organisation?
A good question. I probably should conclude that point by saying that we will be returning to fundraising. The RSL will be returning to it. It's just been postponed while the inquiry's on. Because I had examples of, the widows, the Women's Guild of the RSL sitting on corners where people wouldn't buy a poppy because they didn't know where the money was going, and they weren't abusive, but were saying, well, we don't know where the money's going, so why would we do that? It will return. The RSL's not without cash. It's been badly, in my view, it had been badly managed in the past, and I'm confident that when the inquiry's finished and when James Brown has made put his line in the sand and we've changed the legislation, I'm very confident that the future of the RSL. Yep.
I notice each of your portfolios have people who put service before self. There must be some nights, and obviously your portfolio is only a 9 to 5 portfolio. There are obviously days and nights you have sleepless nights and concerns about things. Is anything particular that you carry on a daily basis?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I often say that the Veterans Affairs was supposed to be my pleasant Sunday afternoon job, but thanks to the RSL, it was my nightmare Monday morning job. In the CT space, I'm exposed to. Luckily for me, one of my roles as an Army officer was on counter-terrorism exercises. So even as a young captain, I used to go on annual. Back in the day, they were called SACPAV exercises, and now they've changed their name. But I went on a lot of, I did a lot of CT exercises on the comms side. So I had a little bit of exposure, and as I say to the senior officers in the CT command and the police and the military, I suppose, yes, I've never had the exposure that they've had from an operational point of view, but they should be rest assured that I know what I don't know. Yes, there's intelligence that comes over my desk that I wish I hadn't read. It does worry you. I'm more worried about, I suppose the thing that worries me the most, coming from a suburb like Bankstown where it was a melting pot, I'm more worried that people are using counter-terrorism threats and the threat of terrorism to ingrain racism. That worries me. My best man was Lebanese. My groomsman was Croatian. My wife's bridesmaids were all Lebanese. I spent most, so I've got a very multicultural background. Two grandmothers were Polish, two grandfathers were Scottish. And having grown up in the 70s in Bankstown in the 80s when waves of migration was coming through, and there was, I hate the word tolerance, but there was very strong levels of acceptance of that migration coming through. I hate to see people using this, because one of my stump speech in counter-terrorism from a non-operational point of view is reminding everybody the vast majority of victims of terrorism in this world are Muslims. The vast majority of victims of terrorism. The countries in the Middle East that provide us with a lot of support and intelligence are Islamic countries. If you have a look at, and people say, well, but all terrorists are Muslims. Well, mate, I'm married to an Irish Catholic and I'm a Scottish Protestant. I can tell you, mate, it wasn't too long ago that my family would have been horrified, and so would have hers, because of terrorism. And then you just have to go to what's going on in Spain at the moment. You just have to look at what happened, the experience in Sri Lanka with the Tamil Tigers. You can have a look at what's going on in Burma at the moment, where the Muslims are the victims. You can have, I served with people that were on operations in Rwanda. You want to talk about genocide, that was, and terrorism. What happened in Rwanda in 1993 was probably one of the most distasteful episodes in African history. So that's part of the message to get out there. That does keep me awake. And it's not helped by journalists and politicians that want to be populist. So we need to, and I'm not known to be politically correct, but what I want to be known as somebody who tells the story as it is, the facts of the matter. In the corrections portfolio, I inherited 4 less jails than my predecessor inherited, and in the meantime, the Bail Act was tightened up. So you don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar of economics to know that supply and demand, the laws of supply and demand might mean that creates some problems. We've got an extremely well-resourced police force at the moment, and as I remind the police minister, every time he spends $1 solving a crime, I'm going to spend $5 detaining the criminal. And so that it's the economics of the portfolio at the moment. But one thing that keeps me awake in that portfolio is that I've got a strong view that 50% of the people in jail should never leave, and 50% of the people in jail shouldn't be there, and probably have no need to be there. So that's why we've spent $237 million in making sure that we have more rehabilitation programs just targeted at recidivism. I never understood when I took over the job that there were people in jails that were doing these wonderful courses in macrame, and there were guys that were leaving that were still illiterate. So I preferred, I'm sorry, we're just not going to do as much macrame, but with that money I'm going to teach 5 blokes how to read.
Yep, thank you very much, Minister, for coming and speaking to us today. My question was, what led you from the army to a political career? What was the motivation behind that?
Okay, so it wasn't from the army. I was a bit cheeky as a kid, and so I had the youngest of 3. I'd announced to my family when I was in my early teens that after I'm an army officer, I'm going to be a politician. And you know that joke, I told everyone I was going to be a comedian and they laughed at me. Well, they're not laughing now. That was always an ambition. And nobody in my family had ever been involved in politics. Nobody in my family had ever gone to university. It was just something that, we were just a Western Sydney working class family. So I was lucky my parents sacrificed a lot to put me through a low fee private school. And I think that was what I needed, because it was something that provided just that extra bit of discipline that I needed. So I was always going to be a military officer. Then the politics thing was something that came along in my teens, and I decided that I'd want to pursue it. 25 years later, I got elected to Parliament. What motivated me? This is going to sound very, very partisan, because my 2 pops, my 2 grandfathers were actually shop stewards and Labor voters. In fact, my great-grandfather was one of the founding members of the Cessnock Communist Party. So they weren't necessarily conservatives. But I remember growing up and consuming the news, because of, I explained at the beginning, my mum had a very strong focus on education, and so we were consuming the news, and I remember finding out, ironically, that the then Prisons Minister, Rex Jackson, was going to jail for corruption. And I remember thinking, that's not right. You know, politicians are supposed to, I certainly respect, my family didn't disrespect politicians, we actually respected them. We held them up like church leaders and you know, lawyers and military officers. And I remember feeling very sad about that as a kid. And then I worked as a labourer, and I remember to save money to go to university. And I was on a job site, construction site, about 2 days before Christmas. It was a Friday. And at about 10 o'clock, the shop steward came and said, everybody out, everybody closing, the construction site's finished, all go home, we're on strike. And I was very upset because if you go on strike, you don't get paid, and I was trying to save every cent I could because I wanted to go to university. And I later found out that the snap strike was caused because there was no salt and pepper on the table. That was the reason in the meal room. The real reason was everybody wanted to go to the pub because it was the Friday before Christmas, but I was a teenage boy, I wasn't even drinking age. So I remember, and then I remember reading more about industrial relations, and at the time it was a period that the BLF had been deregistered and there was a lot of industrial disharmony. And so I just formed liberal views. Luckily then, when I was in my first year at university, I was at a young Liberal function where I sat next to John Howard, and he was looking for a research officer. One thing led to another, and I ended up on his personal staff. And I didn't actually go straight from the military to politics. I actually had 10 years in the private sector. I spent 3 years working for a charity, St John Ambulance, which was the most rewarding thing, one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. And then I had 7 years as a CEO, a deputy CEO and CEO of 2 industry associations, which was really good because it got me some serious corporate experience, and I got to repay some of that hospitality that the union movement gave me when I was a teenager as industry association CEO. So it was always, it actually came from a genuine place, in the sense that I wanted to try to do the right thing by people, and I think that you can tell the politicians that go in for the right reasons, and the ones that don't. It's the ones that come in with an ambition to do something good or to repay something are normally the more, I think, genuine ones. And I must say, as much as I throw rocks at the other side and defend my own side, there are people on both sides that want to do the right thing. I think on my side at the moment, I could name about a half a dozen that are not there for the right reasons. That I probably wouldn't feed them. And I could name the majority of members on the other side that are there for the right reasons. And I'm quite close to a lot of Labor MPs because they've come from the same experience that I've had. I had coffee yesterday with John Robertson, the former Labor leader. There's a politician that we will miss who did the right thing. And was there for the right reasons.
Unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to...
We have one more quick one.
Ahmed? Yeah, okay, one more.
In relation to the Invictus Games,
Yeah.
you put out the search for volunteers. How's that going?
I didn't. The committee did. It's like the Olympics. There's an organising committee. So I've got no oversight on that. Yeah.
I'm sorry to wrap it up.
That's all right.
We're very, very lucky to have the Minister. Please give him a round of applause for the chat today.